into a triangle in the middle. Could you make a square and a circle on this side? That's just because I got a short talk and I just need to, no. Stay where you are and all good. All right, we are going to look at the topic today. Have a look at the straight and the narrow. And we'll start in Matthew Chapter 7. And we'll read a reasonably long passage to start with first. So we'll start in Matthew 7, starting verse 1. Judge not that ye be not judged, for with what judgment ye judge, ye shall be judged, and with what measure ye mete, it shall be measured again to you again. And why beholdest thou the mote that is in thy brother's eye, but considerest not the beam that is in thine own eye? Or how wilt thou say to thy brother, let me pull out the mote out of thine eye, and behold, a beam is in thine own eye? Thou hypocrite, first cast out the beam out of thine own eye, and then thou shalt see clearly to cast out the mote of thy brother's eye. This was all much easier to read before I had to say it out loud. Give not that which is holy unto the dogs, neither cast ye your pearls before swine, lest they trample them under their feet, and turn again and rend you. Ask, and it shall be given you. Seek, and ye shall find. Knock, and it shall be opened unto you. For every one that asketh receiveth, and he that seeketh findeth. To him that knocketh it shall be opened. Or what man is there of you, whom if his son ask bread, will he give him a stone? Or if he ask a fish, will he give him a serpent? If ye then, being evil, know how to give good gifts unto your children, how much more shall your Father which is in heaven give good things to them that ask him? Therefore all things whatsoever ye would that men should do, do ye even so to them. For this is the law and the prophets. Enter ye in at the strait gate, for wide is the gate, and broad is the way that leadeth to destruction. And many there be which go in thereat, because strait is the gate, and narrow is the way, which leadeth unto life, and few there be that find it. And we'll finish there. So this is, and there's a whole heap more through chapter 7. This is so much in those passages. There's probably 1,000 talks that you've heard just out of those scriptures. Judging one another, pearls before swine, ask, seek, knock, good gifts, the straight gate. If you keep reading, then there's false prophets, fruits, the house on the rock. It's a really awesome chapter. If you don't have anything to read Matthew chapter 7, and it'll keep you busy for a while. There's lots of good stuff there. And if you read all the way through to verse 28, it says, And it came to pass, when Jesus had ended these sayings, the people were astonished at his doctrine. It's really short and succinct, lots of different little things in here, but they're all really good meaty topics of themselves, but they kind of give some good punches in there without being a massive passage that you've got to kind of read and digest. It's really good stuff in there. And so I'll be focusing mainly on verse 13 and 14, which is about the strait gate. So we've all heard about the straight and narrow, and this is where that saying comes from. You'll notice that the spelling of straight is not the same, and that's because our colloquial saying has to some extent messed up the English and changed it from straight to straight, because English is good like that, and words that sound the same get spelt differently. So it's not straight as in not crooked. So where you might say, he's back on the straight and narrow, someone's back on track, they're behaving themselves, they're not causing any ruckus. Quite often we hear this about footballers and other people in, celebrities or wannabe celebrities who have gone on some bender and now, they've turned their life around, they're going to be a good person, they're back on the straight and narrow until next week and they do it all again. Straight, this is a different spelling, and S-T-R-A-I-T, and it means constricted, narrow or tight. So it's talking about with these gates, it's talking about there's a big, nice wide gate, and there's an itsy-bitsy teeny narrow gate. It's not that someone cut the gate out with one of those scissors you had in Sunday school that does a nice crinkly edge, or something like that. It's or that there's a funny bend before the gate. It means it's a narrow, a small gate that you're not going to fit much through. So that got me thinking, because I noticed it was spelt funny, and I noticed fun things like that. So we're going to have a bit of a look at nautical straits, because that's the only other thing I was aware of that was spelt that way. So I'll apologise to Dad, who's an oceanographer, and will probably leave halfway through this because I'll get so much nautical stuff wrong, but when he walks out, you can ask him what the problem was later. He can give you the list. So a strait was defined as a narrow passage of water between two areas of land, usually connecting two seas. So when they mean narrow, they're talking oceans narrow, not like creek out the back kind of narrow. So you've got most of the straits are kind of 10-ish kilometres wide, that kind of ballpark. They do change a bit, but 10 k's is still a fair distance. So when people swim the English Channel, so it's, you've got there's the Dover Strait, which is the bit between England and France where it's the narrowest. That's considered a strait. And there's a few others. We've got the Bosphorus Strait, which is between the Black Sea and the Aegean Sea, which basically joins Europe and Asia. The Golden Gate is actually a strait which joins the Pacific Ocean and San Francisco Bay. The Strait of Gibraltar, which is quite well known, which joins the Atlantic and the Mediterranean, and also Europe and Africa. The Malacca Strait between Indonesia, well, next to Indonesia, which joins the Pacific to various other bits on the other side of Indonesia. The Hormuz Strait, which joins the Persian Gulf to the Gulf of Oman, which is where most of our oil comes through, and there's lots of Navy ships currently yelling at pirates or scaring pirates away. It's a good place for pirates because all the ships have to suddenly converge into a narrow area, which means it's much easier to find them. Instead of being in a big area, they all get pushed into a narrower area. And the Taiwan Strait, which is obviously in the news a bit at the moment with China and Taiwan. It's a small-ish piece of water that basically stops China being part of mainland China, which is the main contention. So there's a number of straits. There's Bass Strait, obviously, for Australia, Torres Strait. These are passages of water that are not a river that you can kick a football over. They're still big bits of water, but they are called straits. So a few characteristics. They've often got a fairly significant flow or volume of water coming through them, and that's where connecting two seas, and they have different inputs and outputs. They can also be reversing or constant. You can find that the strait always flows one way, or that the strait actually changes on the tide. So depending on what time of day it is when you want to go through it, the water might be not going the right way. And that can do various, depending on the time of day, the seasons, the moon, it can make the straits interesting. And I've got a little thing out of a scientific paper. I couldn't find anything Dad wrote about it, so this is someone else's work. Sorry, Dad. The confinement of the flow by a strait can also give rise to profound dynamical consequences, including choking or hydraulic control, a process similar to that by which a dam releases the flow from a reservoir. The funneling geometry can lead to enhanced tidal modulation and increased velocities, giving rise to local instabilities, mixing, internal bores, jumps, and other striking hydraulic and fine-scale phenomena. That sounds exciting and messy. Basically, because it's a strait and you've gone from ocean that's very large, hundreds of kilometres, thousands of kilometres, to 10 kilometres, and then you've got the same thing on the other side, it can make an awful mess of the bit in the middle. So straits can be interesting in terms of what they do to the water and trying to pass through them. I think we often hear about Bass Strait getting pretty hectic at times, and poor people on the ferry going from Melbourne to Launceston or Melbourne to Devonport can have some pretty exciting trips through that small stretch of water. I think Greer might have done one or two fun ones, but yeah, it can get pretty hectic out there. If we go to Ephesians Chapter 14. Ephesians Chapter 4. You're going to struggle finding 14. I'll give you a guess which verse we're going to, though. We'll see if the audio people work that one out. And I'll just start reading. Okay, Ephesians Chapter 4, mystery verse that's probably 14. That we henceforth be no more children, tossed to and fro and carried about with every wind of doctrine, by the sleight of men and the cunning craftiness whereby they lie in wait to deceive. But speaking the truth in love may grow up in him in all things, which is the head, even Christ. So regardless of what the world throws at us, I suppose a bit like the Strait, where you can get these different features in the flow of the water that can cause you problems. If we don't know where we're headed, if we don't know what our doctrine is or why we're here or what we're doing, if we just think there's some kind of nice people who are a bit kooky that we come and see on a Sunday and have a cup of coffee with, it's very easy to be thrown off course and to be kind of troubled by the world. But if we're following Christ the head, if we're following his word, following his directions, we'll have this, regardless of what we're going through or what we're going over, we'll have a solid direction and we'll be able to maintain that course. And not worrying about, sometimes the tide will help, sometimes it won't. And sometimes in life, we've just got to wait for the Lord to answer questions and problems. It's the same if you happen to be going through a strait that you know is tidal, you might want to wait for 5 hours until the tide turns and go with the tide. And you'll probably get there at the same time as you would have if you decide to go through against the tide and you just expend a heap more energy trying to push against a whole heap of water or wind or both. So sometimes you've got to trust the Lord and let him help guide us through the straits. In physics, which is something I know a little more about than oceanography, we often use nozzles in things like jet engines. So you've got a certain amount of air that comes in one end, and that certain amount of air has got to get out the other end. By putting a nozzle in the way, you make the hole much smaller, so it means everything's got to go a lot faster. And that basically is how you create thrust, or one of the ways that the jet engine creates the thrust. You basically have to spit the same amount of stuff out of a much smaller hole, so it comes out a lot faster. And if we apply that Ephesians 4 principle, and we're working together with Christ as the head, we can create a whole heap of spiritual thrust by having this direction, having a certainty in our doctrine, not being, oh, that looks shiny, let's try that for a week. We hear someone like Pastor Jock gets up and talking about, when they had horse and carts, when the fellowship first started, and that nothing's changed since then, though. Our doctrine's still the same. Everything's changed since then, apart from our doctrine. And that's a great thing to not be thrown to and fro. We don't have, you don't rock up wondering what you're going to hear until I start talking on a Sunday. You know what you're going to get. You're going to be fed out of the Bible. You're going to be fed good, solid, spiritual advice. And that's what we really need in this fellowship. And that's how it survives. And if we don't, then we're more likely to succumb to the pressures of the world and the turbulence of this world. So with straits, another aspect of them or characteristic is they're often formed through, over millions of years, they've basically formed through erosion, movement of tectonic plates, various events like floods can also help, but basically at one point most of these things were joined as land and now they're not because of this erosion. What that means is that there's often islands, reefs, shallow bits, because it's not like there's a giant deep ocean for 100 k's. There were two bits that used to be joined and now they're not. There's various straits where you've got to be fairly careful not to run aground. We've got old mate Evergreen that we saw managed to chuck his boat into the Suez Canal, which we all had a giggle at until we tried to order something online. While he had his container ship parked across that a few years ago. I think we probably all remember those amusing photos. The straits aren't like that. The Suez Canal's 200 odd metres wide. We're talking 10 k's-ish for most of these, so it's not like you're playing bumper cars down a strait, but there's still islands, there's still reefs, that depending on the actual strait. You can get into trouble if you don't know where you're going, and we'll have a look at John chapter 16. And verse 13. Howbeit, when he, the Spirit of truth, is come, he will guide you in all truth. For he shall not speak of himself, but whatsoever he shall hear, that shall he speak, and he will show you things to come. So we've got the Spirit of truth, and it guides us in truth. We've got a guide, which is the Holy Spirit. Jesus came and lived as a man. He knows the pitfalls and traps of life. He also gave us a way through safely through his sacrifice. So we've got the Holy Spirit, we've got the Bible. So they're fundamentally our compass and our charts. This allows us to navigate these waters. It's only a problem if you run into the island. If you miss the island by a metre, it's not a problem. We've got this guidance to navigate life and to enter into that eternal blessing as we follow that guidance. You've got another aspect of straits is most of them are fairly critical to supporting fast and more efficient transport of goods. The Malacca Straits, basically, if you want to get from Asia across to Europe, you'll go through the Malacca Straits because that's the quickest, shortest, easiest way through. Similar to where we've got man-made canals like the Panama Canal and the Suez Canal. They dug those because there wasn't a natural way through and they didn't want to have to go all the way around the long way. So at times you're forced to go through these narrower elements, or they're useful to save time. There's a whole heap of high economic value that goes through those. They're also a strategic feature. You can deny access. So if you decide you don't like somebody, you can stop them using those straits. At the moment, Turkey will not allow a Russian warship to enter the Black Sea. They control the Bosphorus Strait, and it's basically part of their NATO obligations is to stop any Russian warship from entering the Black Sea because they've decided that Russia's naughty and they're not allowed in. They have that right fundamentally through the UN and through NATO that people can restrict access to basically waterways, and that's a key thing. That means Russia can't send any more ships into the Black Sea. There's various things that can't go through. If someone decides to close something, that's bad luck. Even in ancient times, they were highly strategic features where they had enough catapults and things that they could basically stop passage through a number of these straits because they're narrow enough that you can throw something far enough into them that you cause problems. So if we look at Luke chapter 13, and verse 23, then said one unto him, Lord, are there few that be saved? And he said unto them, strive to enter in at the strait gate, for many, I say to you, will seek to enter in and shall not be able. For once the master of the house is risen up and hath shut to the door, and you begin to stand without and knock at the door, saying, Lord, Lord, open unto us, and he shall answer and say unto you, I know you not whence ye are. So, keep going. Then shall you begin to say, we have eaten and drunk in thy presence, and thou hast taught in our streets. But he shall say, I tell you, I know you not whence ye are. Depart from me, all ye workers of iniquity. So to enter in the strait gate, we've got this is talking about the strait gate, which is in verse 24. In this case, the doorman is the master of the house. He's not some flunky you can slip a 50 to and say, hey, mate, buddy, let me in. The Lord is manning the gate, and there's no fooling God. There's no tricking God. God knows everything. God sees everything. For us to get entrance in, when we get to that gate and we seek entry into his kingdom, he'll be checking out our papers, and he'll know them. Are we in the Lamb's Book of Life? If we're found wanting, we'll be turned away. But if we're found worthy, we'll be allowed to pass through that gate, and that's similar to a strait and the economic control that you can have over it. So our passage to and through the strait gate and through the straits of life may well be a tough voyage at times. They're perilous waters that we're dealing with. It's not always going to be the tide with us, the wind behind us. As someone who rides a bike a bit, you realise how much the wind behind you helps. Life's not always going to do that for us, but the Lord's always going to be there. He hasn't promised us rainbows and unicorns all the time in this life. Rainbows and unicorns, certainly what he's promised in the future. Streets of gold, no tears, no sorrow. That sounds pretty good, but we've got to get through this one to start. What he has promised is safe passage. Nothing that we can't get through, nothing that he can't help us through. One thing to remember, straits aren't rapids or waterfalls. Strait is a navigable piece of water that's nominally flat. You don't have to... a waterfall is kind of a one-way street. Rapids are generally a one-way street. The straits go both ways. You can pass them. It might not always be easy if you're going against the tide or against the wind, but you can get through a strait both ways all the time. And that's life for us. We can always get through, but are we looking to the Lord? Is he the wind behind us, or are we fighting against him? Is the world helping us blow us, off course? Are we taking bad advice? Are we, following God's advice and God's direction, or are we following the world's direction? We've got a great crew in the fellowship. We've got Pastor Chris and the oversight that we've heard about in Pastor Jock's talk. I've spent a short amount of time on a fairly large ship and seen what goes on to keeping that running. There are people 24/7 sitting next to the engine just in case it stops. While you're sleeping in your bed happily, there's someone sitting there watching an engine just in case something goes wrong. And we've got that in the fellowship too. We've got that in the Lord as well. There's always someone watching. There's always someone there to help and try to put things to right if things do start to falter. The straight gate, or passing through the straits, won't always be an easy choice, but it's a necessary one for us to get to our destination. Yep, there might be a nice big easy ocean that we could tootle through. It might be nice and flat, but if your destination happens to be on the other side of the strait, you've got to get through and you've got to work out a way. So, if we work together, we follow the Lord, then, his promises will come to pass and we'll have smooth sailing once he returns. I'll leave it there. We'll have a short time of prayer in the Spirit now, if we get into that.